On my first night in that big Charleston house, my new mother-in-law looked me up and down like I was a stray dog someone dragged in from the rain. Then she said 5 words that changed everything. "This girl is far too rough." I stood there in my wedding dress, holding my old suitcase, and I knew right then that I had made the biggest mistake of my whole life. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves real drama, and subscribe so you never miss our next tale. Also, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We absolutely love hearing from you. My name is Tess, and I grew up on a farm outside Tuscaloosa, Alabama. We didn't have much money, but we had love. We had dirt under our fingernails and the smell of fresh bread in the morning. We had Mama singing while she hung laundry and Papa teaching me how to fix a tractor engine. Life was simple and good. Then Robert Tavares came to town. He was visiting some business friends, and he saw me at the summer fair. He was tall and handsome, with neat hair and clean hands that had never touched farm work. He smiled at me like I was something precious. He talked about Charleston like it was heaven on earth. Big houses, fancy parties, beautiful dresses, and a life where I'd never have to worry about anything again. I was only 19 years old. I didn't know any better. When he asked me to marry him after just 2 months, I said yes. Mama cried happy tears. Papa looked worried but didn't say anything. They thought I was getting a chance at a better life. The wedding was small and quick. Robert said his family couldn't travel, so we'd have a big celebration when we got to Charleston. I wore Mama's old wedding dress that she fixed up for me. Robert wore a black suit that probably cost more than our whole farm. We said our promises in the little church, and then we got on a train heading east. The train ride took forever. Robert barely talked to me. He read newspapers and looked out the window. When I tried to hold his hand, he pulled away and said he was tired. I told myself he was just nervous about bringing home a wife. I told myself everything would be fine once we got to his family's house. I was so wrong. The Tavares house wasn't just big. It was enormous, like a palace from a storybook. White columns stood at the front like giant teeth. The windows were so clean they looked like mirrors. The lawn was perfect, not a single weed anywhere. A woman in a black dress opened the door before we even knocked. She didn't smile. Inside was even worse. Everything was white or gold or made of glass. The floors were so shiny I could see my reflection. Giant paintings of serious-looking people hung on every wall, all of them staring down at me with cold eyes. The air smelled like flowers and furniture polish, not like a real home at all. That's when I met Margaret Tavares. She came down the big staircase like a queen, wearing a gray dress that probably cost more than my papa made in a whole year. Her hair was pulled back so tight it made her face look mean. Her lips were thin and pressed together. Her eyes swept over me once, twice, and I watched her face turn sour like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Robert," she said, not even looking at me anymore. "This girl is far too rough. Whatever were you thinking?" My face burned hot with shame. I looked down at my simple dress, the one I thought was pretty. I looked at my hands, which were clean but had calluses from farm work. I looked at my worn suitcase with the broken latch. Suddenly I felt like trash that didn't belong in this perfect, cold house. Robert didn't defend me. He didn't tell his mother she was being cruel. He just nodded slowly and said, "I know, Mother. But it's done now. We'll work on her." Work on me. Like I was a broken thing that needed fixing. Margaret sniffed and waved her hand at the woman in the black dress. "Beatrice, show the girl to the guest room. Robert, come with me. We need to discuss this situation." Guest room. Not our room. Not the place where a husband and wife should sleep together. A guest room, like I was just visiting. Beatrice led me up the stairs without saying a word. The guest room was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The bed was huge with silk covers. The furniture was all dark wood that gleamed in the lamplight. But it felt like a museum, not a bedroom. Everything was too perfect, too cold, too empty. "Dinner is at 7 sharp, Beatrice said. "Mrs. Tavares expects everyone to dress appropriately and be on time. She does not tolerate roughness of any kind." Then she left, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a lock. I sat on the edge of that perfect bed and cried. Not loud sobbing, just quiet tears that slipped down my cheeks and spotted my dress. I thought about Mama and Papa back home. I thought about our warm little farmhouse where people hugged and laughed and didn't care if you had dirt under your nails. I thought about how stupid I'd been to think a fancy man from Charleston could really love a simple farm girl like me. That night at dinner was even worse. Margaret sat at the head of the long table, Robert sat at the other end, and I sat in the middle, far away from both of them. The food was fancy, things I didn't recognize and didn't know how to eat properly. I watched Robert and tried to copy what he did with all the different forks and spoons. Margaret watched me like a hawk watching a mouse. Every time I did something wrong, she made a small noise in her throat. A little sound of disgust. When I reached for the wrong spoon, she said, "No, child. The small spoon for soup, not the large one. Didn't your mother teach you anything?" My mother taught me plenty. I wanted to shout. She taught me kindness and hard work and how to love people. But I kept my mouth shut and used the right spoon. After dinner, Robert finally came to my room. I thought maybe now, finally, he would act like a real husband. Maybe he would apologize for his mother. Maybe he would hold me and tell me everything would be okay. Instead, he stood by the door and wouldn't come close. "Tess," he said quietly, "you need to understand something. My mother runs this house. What she says goes. You'll need to learn our ways, our manners, our rules. You'll need to become the kind of wife that fits into our family." "But Robert," I whispered, "I'm already your wife. You married me just the way I am." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something cold in his eyes. Something that made my stomach twist with fear. "I married you because I needed a wife," he said. "But you're not quite right yet. You're not tight enough for this family. Too loose, too rough around the edges. We'll fix that though. Mother knows how." Then he left. Just walked out and closed the door. I heard a key turn in the lock from the outside. I was locked in. In this beautiful, horrible room, in this cold, perfect house, I was a prisoner on my very first night as a married woman. That's when I heard it. Music, coming from somewhere in the house. A woman's laugh, light and pretty. Then Robert's voice, warm in a way he'd never spoken to me. I pressed my ear against the door and listened to my husband talking to someone else, someone he actually cared about. And that's when I understood the terrible truth. I wasn't Robert's wife. I was his cover, his disguise, his way of looking normal to the world outside. Somewhere in this house was the person he really loved. I just didn't know her name was Vivian yet. I didn't sleep at all that first night. I lay in that big bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house. Footsteps in the hallway. Doors opening and closing. That woman's laugh again, softer now, coming from somewhere below me. And Robert's voice, speaking in whispers I couldn't quite hear. When morning came, Beatrice unlocked my door and brought me breakfast on a tray. She didn't look at me, didn't speak except to say, "Mrs. Tavares wants to see you in the parlor at 10 o'clock. Wear something appropriate." But I didn't have anything appropriate. All my dresses were simple farm dresses, the kind you wear to church on Sunday or to town on market day. I put on the nicest one I had, a blue cotton dress with white buttons. When I looked in the mirror, all I could see was what Margaret would see. A rough country girl who didn't belong. The parlor was the coldest room in that cold house. Margaret sat in a high-backed chair like a throne, and she had papers spread out on the table beside her. When I walked in, she didn't ask me to sit down. She just looked at me with those ice-cold eyes and began to speak. "Let me be very clear with you, Tess," she said. "My son made a mistake by marrying you, but what's done is done. Now we must manage the situation. You will not embarrass this family. You will learn to walk properly, speak properly, and behave properly. You will not leave this house without permission. You will not write letters to your family without my approval. You will be seen but rarely heard. Do you understand?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I was hundreds of miles from home with no money and no way to get back. So I nodded, feeling tears burn behind my eyes. "Good," Margaret said. "Beatrice will begin your lessons this afternoon. Posture, manners, proper speech. You have a great deal to learn." The next few weeks were like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every morning, Beatrice drilled me on how to stand, how to sit, how to hold a teacup, how to speak without using country words. Margaret watched everything, correcting me with sharp words whenever I made a mistake. I felt like a dog being trained to do tricks. Robert avoided me completely. He left early in the morning for his office in town and came home late at night. He never came to my room. He never asked how I was doing. It was like I didn't exist to him at all. But I knew he was home at night because I could hear him. Talking, laughing, moving around in a room I wasn't allowed to enter. There was a door at the end of the hallway on the second floor that was always locked. I asked Beatrice about it once, and her face went pale. "That's not your concern," she whispered, looking around like someone might hear. "Don't ask about that room. Don't even look at that door. Mrs. Tavares's orders." That just made me more curious. What was behind that door? Who was Robert talking to every night? I found out 3 weeks after I arrived. It was late afternoon, and I'd finished my lessons with Beatrice. I was walking upstairs to my room when the doorbell rang. Beatrice was in the kitchen, and Margaret had gone out for tea with her friends. I stood at the top of the stairs, not sure what to do. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. Someone really wanted in. I went down and opened the door. A woman stood there, and she was the most beautiful person I'd ever seen. She had dark red hair that curled perfectly around her face. Her dress was expensive and fashionable, showing off a tiny waist. Her lips were painted bright red, and her eyes were green like emeralds. She looked at me with surprise, then with something that might have been pity. "Oh," she said softly. "You must be Tess, Robert's wife." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Who are you?" "I'm Vivian," she said, walking past me into the house like she owned it. "Robert didn't tell you about me, did he?" "Of course he didn't. Poor thing." I followed her as she walked straight to that locked door at the end of the hallway. She pulled out a key from her purse and unlocked it. The door swung open, and I saw inside. It was beautiful. A sitting room with soft chairs, paintings on the walls, books everywhere. And photographs. Photographs of Robert and Vivian together, smiling, holding hands, looking at each other the way he'd never looked at me. "This is where Robert and I spend our time," Vivian said, turning to face me. "This is where he's happy. Did you really think he married you for love, darling?" The Tavares family needed Robert to have a wife, someone respectable and dull who wouldn't ask questions. Someone who could be controlled. You were perfect for that. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "But we're married. He's my husband." Vivian laughed, but it wasn't mean. It was sad. "On paper, yes. But Robert's heart belongs to me. It always has. Margaret knows. She arranged your marriage to hide the truth. Rich families like the Tavares can't have scandals. They can't have sons who want to live differently. So they buy pretty little farm girls and lock them away in guest rooms." I stumbled backward, feeling dizzy. Everything made sense now. The coldness. The distance. The locked door. I wasn't a wife. I was a decoration. A lie they could show to the world while they lived their real lives behind locked doors. That night at dinner, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Margaret and Robert sat at their usual places, acting like everything was normal. I sat in the middle, my food untouched, my hands shaking. "I met Vivian today," I said. Margaret's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Robert's face went white. "She told me everything," I continued, my voice getting stronger. "About you and her. About why you really married me. About what I really am to this family." Margaret recovered first. She set down her fork carefully and looked at me with ice in her eyes. "You will not speak of this. You will forget what you saw. You will do your duty as Robert's wife and keep your mouth shut." "My duty?" I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "What duty? To be your prisoner? To pretend I'm married to a man who won't even look at me? To live in a house where I'm treated like I'm nothing?" "You are nothing," Margaret said coldly. "You're a farm girl who got lucky. Without this family, you'd be back in Alabama, poor and nobody. We gave you a chance, and this is how you repay us." Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't care anymore. "I'm not a wife. I'm not a person here. I'm nothing, just like you said. And I can't do this anymore." I ran from the dining room, up the stairs, and locked myself in my guest room. I cried until there were no tears left. Then I lay on that perfect bed in that perfect room and made a decision. I had to leave. I had to go home. But how? I had no money. Margaret read all my letters, so I couldn't ask my parents for help. I was trapped. That's when I remembered something Papa told me once. Tess, he'd said, if you're ever in real trouble and can't reach us, you call your Aunt Caroline in Montgomery. She'll help you no matter what. Aunt Caroline. Papa's older sister. She had a telephone. She had money. She might be able to help me. But I needed to get to a telephone without Margaret or Robert knowing. The house had a telephone in the hallway, but someone was always nearby. I needed to get out of the house. 3 nights later, I made my move. I waited until everyone was asleep. Then I put on my shoes, crept down the stairs as quiet as a mouse, and unlocked the front door. My heart pounded so loud I thought everyone in the house could hear it. The night air hit my face, and I ran. I ran down the perfect lawn, past the perfect gardens, onto the street. I ran until I found a drugstore that was still open. The man behind the counter looked surprised to see a young woman running in so late, but he let me use his telephone. Aunt Caroline answered on the 3rd ring. When she heard my voice, shaking and desperate, she didn't ask questions. She just said, "Tell me where you are, honey. I'm coming to get you." I told her. Then I bought a chocolate bar with a few coins I'd hidden in my pocket. I sat on the curb outside that drugstore, eating that chocolate and feeling free for the first time in weeks. That small act of escape, of choosing something for myself, changed everything. Aunt Caroline came the next morning. She marched right into that house and told Margaret Tavares exactly what she thought of her. Then she took me home. The train ride back to Alabama was long, but every mile felt like freedom. When I finally saw our farm, saw Mama and Papa waiting on the porch, I cried again. But these were different tears. These were tears of relief. I was home. But even home wasn't safe from the Tavares family's reach, and the hardest part was still to come. Being home should have felt like a dream come true. Mama cooked all my favorite foods. Papa fixed up my old room just the way I liked it. The farm smelled like earth and growing things, not like polish and fake flowers. But something had changed inside me, and something had changed in how people looked at me too. The gossip started almost immediately. In a small town like ours, news travels faster than lightning. Everyone knew I'd married Robert Tavares, the rich man from Charleston. Everyone knew I'd come running back home after just a few weeks. They didn't know why, but that didn't stop them from talking. At church, women whispered behind their hands when I walked by. At the general store, conversations stopped when I came in. I heard the words they thought I couldn't hear. Failure. Too rough. Not good enough for him. Probably did something wrong. It hurt worse than anything Margaret had said to me because these were my people, my neighbors, folks I'd known my whole life. They were supposed to understand. But instead, they looked at me like I was damaged goods. Mama tried to comfort me. "They'll forget soon enough," she said, stroking my hair like I was a little girl again. "Some new scandal will come along, and you'll be old news." But I knew better. In small towns, people have long memories. Papa was different. He didn't say much, just watched me with worried eyes. One evening, about 2 weeks after I got home, he sat down next to me on the porch steps. "Tess," he said quietly, "I need you to tell me the truth. Did that man hurt you? Because if he did, I don't care how rich his family is. I'll go to Charleston myself and make things right." I told him everything. About Margaret's cruelty. About Robert's coldness. About Vivian and the locked door and being treated like a prisoner instead of a wife. When I finished, Papa's jaw was tight and his hands were clenched into fists. "You did the right thing coming home," he said. "You stay here as long as you need. This is your home. Always will be." Those words helped, but they didn't fix the bigger problem. I couldn't hide on the farm forever. I needed to figure out what to do with my life now. 3 months passed. I helped Mama with the garden. I helped Papa fix fences and feed the animals. I tried to pretend everything was normal. But at night, I lay awake wondering if I'd ever feel normal again. Then the letter came. It was from Margaret Tavares, written on fancy paper with her name printed at the top in gold letters. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was cold and businesslike, just like Margaret herself. She wrote that there had been developments in Charleston. Vivian was pregnant with Robert's child. The scandal was about to explode, and the Tavares name was in danger. Margaret needed me to come back to Charleston, to play the part of the dutiful wife, to help cover up the mess her son had made. In exchange, she offered money. A lot of money. Enough to save our farm, which I hadn't told anyone was struggling. Enough to give Mama and Papa a comfortable life. I read that letter 3 times. Then I walked out to the barn where Papa was working and handed it to him. He read it slowly, his face getting redder with each line. When he finished, he tore it in half. "No," he said firmly. "Absolutely not. They can't buy you back. You're not going." "But Papa, the farm." "I don't care about the farm," he interrupted, which shocked me because Papa loved that farm more than anything except family. "I'd rather lose every acre than watch you go back to that prison. You're worth more than their money, Tess. You're worth more than their whole fancy house and their fake respectability. Don't you ever forget that." I hugged him tight and cried on his shoulder. That's when I knew for sure. I wasn't going back. Not for money. Not for anything. I wrote a letter back to Margaret, short and simple. "No. Find someone else to fix your son's mistakes. I'm done being used." After I mailed that letter, I felt lighter than I had in months. I started going into town more. I held my head high when people whispered. I smiled at the ones who smiled at me and ignored the ones who didn't. That's how I met Frank. Mr. Frank owned the general store in town. He was a widower, about 10 years older than me, with kind eyes and calloused hands from honest work. He'd always been friendly, but after I came back from Charleston, he was extra gentle with me. Never asked nosy questions. Never treated me like I was broken or shameful. One day, he asked if I wanted a job helping in the store. "I could use someone who knows how to work hard," he said. "And who isn't afraid of a little gossip." I said yes. Working in that store changed everything. I was good at it. I was good with customers, good with numbers, good at organizing and keeping things running smooth. Mr. Frank, he started calling himself just Frank, said I was the best help he'd ever had. Slowly, over months of working together, something grew between us. It wasn't like with Robert, all fast and fancy and fake. It was real. It was quiet. It was built on respect and friendship and actually knowing each other. Frank knew about my past. Everyone in town did. But he didn't care. "What matters is who you are now," he told me. "And who you are now is pretty wonderful." A year after I came home from Charleston, Frank asked me to marry him. Not in some grand romantic way. Just standing in the store after closing, with the sunset coming through the windows, he said, "Tess, I love you. I see you, all of you, and I love what I see. Would you marry me? For real this time?" I said yes. Our wedding was small and simple, in the same church where I'd married Robert. But this time it felt right. Mama cried happy tears that were really happy. Papa walked me down the aisle with pride on his face. And Frank looked at me the way a husband should look at his wife, with love and respect and joy. We moved into the apartment above the store. It was tiny compared to the Tavares mansion, but it was ours. Every piece of furniture, every plate, every curtain was chosen by us together. Frank asked my opinion about everything. He listened when I talked. He held me at night and told me I was beautiful and strong and brave. Life wasn't perfect. The store had hard days. Money was sometimes tight. Some people in town still whispered about my failed first marriage. But I was happy. Really, truly happy. Then, 2 years after I'd sent that letter to Margaret, another letter came. This one was from a lawyer in Charleston. It was a summons. The Tavares family was taking legal action. They wanted the marriage annulled officially. They wanted to make sure I had no claim to the family name or fortune. Frank held my hand as I read it. "You okay?" he asked. I looked around our small apartment. At the photos on the wall of me and Frank on our wedding day. At the curtains I'd sewn myself. At the life we'd built together with our own hands and our own hearts. "I'm more than okay," I said. "They can have their papers. They can have their family name. They can have all of it. I don't want any part of that life." I signed the papers when they came. It felt like signing away a bad dream. The lawyer said I could fight for money, that I was entitled to something as Robert's wife. But I didn't want their money. I didn't want anything that tied me to that cold house and those cold people. What Margaret never understood was that you can't measure worth in money or manners or perfect parlors. Real worth comes from being loved for who you are, not what you can pretend to be. I was rough when I arrived in Charleston. I'm still rough now. My hands still have calluses. I still talk like a farm girl. I still don't know which fork to use at fancy dinners, and I don't care to learn. But I'm not nothing. I'm Frank's wife. I'm a good worker. I'm Mama and Papa's daughter. I'm a woman who survived and learned to choose herself. And that's worth more than all the Tavares fortune could ever buy. Years later, I heard that Robert and Vivian eventually moved away to some place up north where people didn't know their story. I heard Margaret grew old and bitter in that big house, all alone. I heard the Tavares fortune got smaller and smaller as the years went by. I don't know if any of that's true. I don't really care. What I know is this. On my first night in Charleston, Margaret told me I wasn't tight enough for her family. She was right. I wasn't. I was too big for their small, cruel world. I was too real for their fake life. I was too strong to stay in their gilded cage. And thank God for that. If this story touched your heart, please do us a favor. Hit that like button so more people can find it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they're worth more than how others treat them. Subscribe to our channel because we've got more powerful stories coming your way. And please, drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Tessa's journey and where you're watching from. We read every single comment, and hearing from you means the world to us. You're not just viewers, you're part of our storytelling family, and we love connecting with you. Remember, being rough around the edges isn't a flaw. Sometimes, it's exactly what saves you.